And the reason why people don't like blue balls.
Hello over there.
5 principles of user experience.
Did you know that your users are not just customers sitting at home playing with platforms? They are actually people inside your organization who need a good user experience, because otherwise they're not going to do good work.
If your design sucks, your documentation is also going to suck.
Has anybody ever read the manual for Microsoft Word?
There are no bad users, just bad design. This is where I make some enemies here, because I'm going to bash AWS a little bit.
Everyone should learn user experience and everyone should apply it in their job, whether it is creating a script or doing any piece of code or application or work to communicate with other teams or to communicate with everyone else. You should understand what good design is, because it will help you to pick good tools that are well designed as well.
I knew there was going to be a few giggles there.
Subscribe to this channel, it's amazing.
Fernando is going to come and talk to us all about doing a good user experience. Over to you.
Thank you. So this is actually the full name of the talk. Platform engineering needs to kill RTFM. This is it. This is what it means, in case any of you didn't know. I'm not going to read it out loud for obvious reasons. So, first of all, let me say documentation is great. This talk is not about bashing documentation. But outsourcing your design to the manual is terrible. Meaning that if your design sucks, your documentation is also going to suck, because it's going to be really big, it's going to be hard to read, and all of that. I feel very strongly that design is always more important than documentation. Design is your first and most important layer of communication with the user. So that's where you start communicating with the user, not with documentation, not talking to them, not having meetings with them. This is where you need to start, where you need to do your communication. This is a very popular meme. It's funny, but it's also a little disingenuous, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. Now, imagine that you have this toaster that is very complicated to operate, and whenever you get something wrong, you get stabbed, right? And then you call support, and then they tell you that, oh, have you read the man page? No, click, boom. See, this is what RTFM driven design is, right? You create something that is very complicated, and then you look down on the user for not reading the manual, right? This is our sysadmin. Let's call him Jimmy Jones. He's frustrated because he's on call and something happened to his Kubernetes cluster and he doesn't know what it is. Now, let's say that he has been very diligent and he read the manual of Kubernetes, the cloud provider, etc., etc. But this cluster has another 200 microservices running on it. Are we expecting him to read 200 manuals of each microservice or whatever? No, of course not. We expect each microservice to be able to communicate with contextual errors or whatever, right? So that's why we want our applications to talk for themselves as much as possible. And I want to give you a good example, a very dramatic example actually, real example of what RTFM-driven design looks like.
Welcome to C by GE Smart Tips. We're going to show you how to factory reset your C by GE bulbs.
For 8 seconds. Turn off for 2 seconds. Turn on for 8 seconds. Turn off for 2 seconds. Turn on for 8 seconds. Turn off for 2 seconds. Turn on for 8 seconds.
If it doesn't, your bulb may be running on an older version of firmware and will need to try the second factory reset process.
I'm not going to make you sit through the second factory reset process. And it's very intuitive. 2 seconds, 8 seconds, 2 seconds. Firmware 2.8. That's how you get to the 2 seconds, 8 seconds. And by the way, that was real. I thought it was an April Fool's joke when I saw that video. That is an actual thing, which is crazy. Okay, so this is where I make some enemies here because I'm going to bash AWS a little bit. But if you get angry, just want to let you know that I have an echo dot here that you can have. Yeah?
There was some AWS people here earlier, but they've all gone. So.
Okay, good. So this is kind of how I started my crusade for user experience, right? I started my career first working with Linode, which is a small cloud provider. Then I worked a little bit with AWS, and I was like, this is weird. I don't know if I like this very much. But it wasn't very long. And then I moved on to a different job working with GCP. And I thought GCP is good. I think it's a good cloud platform. And I work with it. I mean, there's things to complain about it. It's not perfect. But it was a good experience. I liked working with it. And then later I got a job with AWS. And I thought, I had forgotten everything I knew about AWS. And I thought, well, it's going to be more or less the same. So I went to work with AWS and I absolutely hated it. I hated it so much. Not because AWS is bad. AWS is good. Obviously, it is good. It's very scalable. It has a lot of features, a lot of products. It's a good platform. But the user experience sucks. And objectively sucks. And I'm going to tell you why across this talk. And I agree with the critics. I just disagree with their conclusions. So, for example, this guy says, picking AWS over Google Cloud. It was one of his conclusions of endorsing. And he says here, there's a feel that Google lives on robots and automation, while Amazon lives with a customer focus. This is so true. And because that is true, that is exactly why I think Google created a better platform. Because they don't want to talk to you. They want to create a tool that speaks for itself, that is easy to use, that you don't need to go to the documentation as much, that is very easy to get, it's intuitive. And when you look at Google and Amazon's stated values, which, by the way, they're both good companies because they live by them and their products kind of reflect that. Google says, since the beginning, we focus providing on the best user experience possible. And Amazon says customer obsession. And I think that is true because what I hear from people who've used both products, I think they get much more coddled by customer service. By Amazon, you get more handhold, I guess. You get to talk more with them. So in that sense, I suppose that Amazon has the upper hand, which is good. If that's what you want, then you should go with AWS. By the way, when you Google GCP versus AWS now, that article, that blog post that I wrote is like usually one of the top results. But Google didn't pay me, just wanted to let you know that. I wish they did, but I didn't get a penny out of them. And the point that I want to say here is that you may not need AWS or Azure or even GCP, because if your needs are small, you don't need to go like huge with a big cloud provider because AWS is very complex. It has a lot of features. It is complex. Well, I would argue that it's unnecessarily complex, but it is also complex for a reason. It offers a lot of things, right? And the same with the other big cloud providers. Smaller providers are easier and cheaper. I feel a little funny about this slide right now because I right now work for Civo as of this Monday. When I created these slides and the first time I did this talk, I did not work for Civo, so don't feel like I'm actually like promoting here for you to go and buy this product. I mean, these are other competitors as well. But when I started my career, I was working with Linode, and I think Linode does a pretty good job for most small to medium companies and DigitalOcean as well. So they're just cloud tools that are very simple to use and they're cheaper. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to go with AWS or GCP or Azure just as a default, just because they're the bigger ones. And some people, I feel like they don't realize that. And there's a lot of talk about platform engineering recently, and it seems like a lot of the pain that comes from that platform engineering aims to solve is like aimed with infrastructure provisioning, infrastructure delivery for developers. And that comes a lot from the pain that comes from understanding AWS, from giving an account to a developer and say, okay, figure this one out. And part of me feels that platform engineering is kind of similar to getting an easy cloud provider. If you can provide an account to a developer, and if you're a small company and they can figure things out themselves, without having to, get certified or, read a lot of manuals. And for big companies, platform engineering could be infrastructure abstractions of any kind. It doesn't necessarily have to be an internal development platform, but creating abstractions that make it easy, make the experience easier. So let's talk about how not to do this. And I want to talk about 5 principles of user experience, that I sort of filter out of these 2 books that I read. And I recommend anyone to read these 2 books, especially anyone in engineering, because the point that I'm trying to make here is that user experience is a form of communication with your users. And if you are an engineer of any kind and you're creating a script, just a script or anything, just to give to someone to use, that is user experience right there. You can create a script or you can create something that sucks. But if you know what good user experience is, it enables you to create something that is better. And it also enables you to pick stuff that follows this kind of idea of making things easy for the user. So the first one for me is don't outsource the work to the user. So if your product takes minimal amount of the complexity burden, the user is going to be unhappy. And this was one of the things that really annoyed me when I first started using AWS. For example, and by the way, all of the things that I'm saying about AWS, I think AWS has gotten better in a few of the things that I had issues with at the beginning. But for example, I was coming from GCP and I was using Google Kubernetes Engine there, GKE. And then I started using EKS, which had just recently been released for AWS. And like they really stretched the concept of manage, in the sense that it didn't do a lot. It didn't create nodes for you. It didn't even create a lot of the things inside the cluster. It basically was just like a dumb control plane. And it didn't do a lot of the work for you. There was a lot of tedious effort that you had to do in order to get a cluster going. Whereas with GKE, it was just like, okay, create this cluster and everything is pretty much done for you. And if you're paying a lot for a cloud, you expect this kind of thing, right? You're paying a lot, so you want them to do most of the work, not shifted to you. Not everything that you have to do should be like an IKEA job, right? This is another one. They are not bad users, just bad design. I know this is quite a common joke as well, but I would argue that yes, there are dumb users. Here's one good example of that that I found on Reddit. So apparently this was in Amazon and people were buying this helmet and they couldn't figure out that this was a protective film. And everyone was just bashing them. Oh, how could you be so stupid? People are stupid, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? I feel like this could have been easily solved by putting a little sticker on the side that said, pill here. That's it. That's all you had to do to solve that problem, right? To get your 5 stars. And yes, sure, you can spend all day saying how stupid users are, that they don't figure out the protective film, but, you know, it would have been easier for you to do that. This is another example when I was like traveling through China. They have these showers and then they have this thing here, warning slippery surface. And sure, they have like a little handle there in case you slip. And then they give you that thing that you have to find that's usually hidden in the corner, like did you put it on the floor and it doesn't slip. But why would you make showers with a slippery floor to begin with? Just make them with floor that's non-slippery, like the shower that I have at home. It's just stupid to do it this way.
Are you sure?
So, yeah. Feedback is contextual communication. It's the feedback that you get from the software when you're using it, right? And yes, don't do this, something happened. I mean, this is, I got this off the internet. It could have been doctored, this image, but it wouldn't surprise me since it's Microsoft. This is another one that I found funny too. Could not copy fast because no. It would have been funny when you actually copy successfully. It's a copy file successfully because yes, that would have been funny. So I think that error messages should educate and help. Enable, I mean, this is one good example. Enable to connect to your account, blah, blah, blah. And then it tells you like what to do and where to go to actually solve your problem. And there are other examples like this. This is the G-Cloud CLI, which I believe a lot of CLIs do this nowadays. If you put something, a word that is wrong, in this case G-Cloud Computer, and it tells you, oh, maybe you meant this. And good feedback is not just for errors. I mean, when you're using the tool, you know, you should get like a nice feedback telling you what's going on. This is kind to create clusters, Kubernetes clusters. And I think it's really neat how it has like the nice icons and it tells you what it's doing. And then at the end, if you don't know what the hell to do, it tells you, oh, you don't know what to do next? Go here, bam. And then you know what to do next. I think that's nice. I think that's good user experience. So for more features is not necessarily better. I think there's a flexibility and usability trade-off. And it's funny that I found this image in one of the books that I recommend you do at the beginning, because this was exactly the experience that I had with a TV that I bought. I bought a Samsung TV and we had these two remotes, and both of the remotes were on the table. No one used the remote with the many buttons. No one. Everyone used the smaller one because it's just so much simpler. The most common features that you needed were there. And if you needed more complexity, you could go to some menus. Most of these you didn't need, and also they were like too busy, like it's too close together, easy to get something wrong. So, can anyone tell me what's wrong here, aside from the keyboard being a little dusty? Exactly. See, this is my Philco keyboard, by the way, which I love. It's a Japanese keyboard. It's mechanic. It's really well built. It's built like a tank. It's a really nice keyboard. But the way that they organize this, it always confuses me when I want to raise the volume or lower the volume. And if you look at the Mac, they are the other way around. And we're used to sort of raise the volume going the other way, right? And this is Jenkins. Some of you may know this. The most popular plugin in Jenkins, I think this may have changed. It's been a while since I used Jenkins, full disclosure here. But the most popular plugin for a really long time, it was the plugin that changed the blue balls to the green balls. And the reason why people don't like blue balls is because they're used to... I knew there was going to be a few giggles there. The blue balls in Jenkins were shown to say job successful, and people wanted green for that. Even though you can just sort of consciously say, oh yeah, blue means okay, right? But
the blue are there for people who've got colour blindness.
What's that?
The blue are there because of colour blindness. Because a number of people have got red-green colour blindness, so they can't actually see the difference between the two.
No, the reason why it was this way is because the original creator was Japanese, and in Japan, apparently the lights are blue as well. I don't know if it's because I think it's more of a cultural thing than color blindness.
Green, and then they've got the plug-in for colour blindness.
Is it?
Yep.
Well, but I mean, in this particular case, the reason why people use the plugin is because they're more used to green being success, right? And this is yet another issue that I had with AWS as well. I remember one of the things that I was trying to do the very first time I used AWS, I was trying to assign a static IP to a server, and it took me like a ridiculous amount of time, because I kept going through menus and menus and menus trying to figure out how the hell do you attach a static IP to this server. And it turns out that they call static IPs elastic IPs. It's like static and elastic are like the most opposite things that you can name something. And everyone is used to call it like an IP that you assign to a computer, and a static IP, not an elastic IP. So it was just really confusing. And yeah. And it's not the only example, like you can tell by this meme. And so yeah, conclusion: do not hinge on the manual to communicate with your users. Design is the first and most important layer of communication with your user. The tool must bear most of the burden of the effort to the user. All engineers must get familiar with the fundamentals of user experience. I think probably that one is the most important thing that you can get out of this. This talk, and I think a company must encourage user experience as a way of communication between engineering teams, because ultimately, as a company grows in size and you have multiple teams that need to communicate with each other, you're not going to be talking to each other all the time. You're not going to be blah, 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 blah all the time, and you're not going to be reading documentation. You may have APIs, you may have tooling, you may have like abstractions, right? And those abstractions need to be well designed so you can get into the flow, right? You can easily do your job. Like if you need to abstract some sort of infrastructure for another team to develop and deploy code, then it should be an abstraction there for you to be able to do that. And that's all I have to say, really. I mean, that's me. That's barcode takes to my LinkedIn page in case you want to say hi, and that's all I gotta say, really.
With the keyboard and the, seemingly poor user experience, this might be way off, but you said it was a Japanese keyboard.
Yeah.
Is that because Japanese is...
No, it's not that. The layout of the keyboard is not Japanese. The company that makes the keyboard is Japanese. So it's a British layout, but the volume is all the other way around. I don't know why they did it that way. It's weird. So it may be another thing, like the Jenkins team, they're also Japanese, so maybe they just understand things differently. So.
That's interesting, because when I moved over here, has anyone noticed that, like, the @ symbols between Australian and English QWERTY keyboards are like in the completely wrong place? Yeah, so I thought maybe it was a country cultural thing.
Isn't the best code the code that writes its own documentation?
Yes, but I mean, you're looking at this from. I think the best code is the one that gives. Well, I mean, there's so many ways that you can define best code here, but in the context that I was saying, the best code is the one that makes it easier for the user to interact with it. So I would say that. And in terms of like documentation, if the way you use your application is very convoluted, if you have to take a lot of steps to actually get something done with that application that you're writing, then your code is going to be 25 pages long instead of 1 page. So that's the point that I'm trying to make here, right? So yeah, I mean, when you go through the documentation pages in GCP or in any of the other cloud providers that I mentioned, explaining you how to do things is a lot shorter and easier to follow. But when you go to AWS, it feels like you made a life commitment there. Like you have to go and get certified. Which, in fact, they make a lot of
medically certified.
Yeah, exactly.
Institutionalized.
Yeah, institutionalized. That's a very good way to put it.
So on the code, I'd say the best code doesn't need documentation because the user interface makes it bloody obvious what you're doing. But against that, so going back to your Samsung remotes, you often need multiple layers of interface. You do need that simple interface when you want to do something quickly. And we had those two, and I use both. If I want to do something complex, the simple one is a pain in the arse because you go through too many menus to get there.
But how often do you do the complex things?
I know, but when you need the other one is by far the quickest way. And I support engineering teams doing complicated things. Most of the time, they need a more complicated interface to do the complicated thing they're doing. There is a necessary cost of understanding that.
That's true, and
but we also support management who need a crayon.
That's true. That's why the argument that people make that Vim is the best editor, right? It's very complex, but it works great for the people that are superpower users.
So, what are your thoughts about cultural differences and expectations and how things are supposed to work? So, like, for example, I don't know if you mentioned you've been to China. Have you actually used a website targeting the East Asian market? They look very different from.
There's a couple of videos online about it. I don't know if you watched them. There's a couple of very popular videos on YouTube about it, commenting on how extremely complex websites in Japan and China are. It's so busy with stuff. They're not my favorite, but if they're happy with it, then great. I mean, it definitely is. There is a cultural difference right there, and I don't know whether that is sufficient for them or is just down to the palate of. I mean, ultimately, you are catering to your users, right? If your user does what they want, then sure.
Just kind of like thinking about user experience and stuff. Obviously, I come from a product that doesn't have a manual, so it's all about kind of trying to help our customers. And I think and I'm going to use a very cliche phrase here, if there's no such thing as a stupid question. I think there's such thing as a silly question, but I don't think anybody should ever be kind of reprimanded for it. But I think when thinking about user experiences, I've always thought about a few things around, obviously, the simplicity of the product in terms of does it direct a person well, but also the perception of the person using it. So, for example, if I've done something wrong, does the product tell me you've done something wrong? Or does it tell me...
Yeah, the feedback,
try,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or does it try doing it this way instead, you know? Does it tell me how to do it right? I watched a really, really interesting video recently on the history of the Microsoft Word ribbon. So obviously, has anybody ever read the manual for Microsoft Word? You have a lot better lives than I do. Right, so, but it was a really, really interesting video for me about how they kind of integrated the ribbon, and they had all these smart menus and stuff like that, and no one ever found the new features because they were all hidden in menus upon menus. So they integrated the ribbon, and then Sibelius, an Avid company, came in and licensed the ribbon menu to use in their own music writing software, which I used a little bit as a music person myself, and it sucked because they didn't do it very well. And I think it was a sort of thing of, I think it's so easy to look at a design and think that's great, and I'm gonna do it that way, but and my question, and the question to you is, how do we kind of take what other people have done as great examples, and almost as an industry, let's think, okay, we've got an idea of how we should do this now. How do I do this without completely butchering it and making it an absolute nightmare for my users?
Yes, I think that's the difference between common sense and and doing your own research and thinking about it deeply and then implementing it rather than just copying someone or following the herd. I do feel that I do feel that there is certainly an amount of research that has to go in there, right? If you understand your users, then you would know how they think, and you would know that if you implement things in a certain way, it may be against what they're actually trying to achieve. Ultimately, your users are trying to achieve a goal, and your product shouldn't be the goal. If the product gets in the way of achieving their goal, that is bad user experience right there. I mean, I'm not familiar with this ribbon example that much myself, but yeah, I mean, just to give you like a general answer here, would say that yeah, you definitely have to do your research and think about things before you actually implement them, which is kind of a generic answer, but.
Well, apparently people use social media like Facebook and Twitter and whatever it's called now, and LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn actually. So LinkedIn, TikTok. Has anyone ever read a manual for any of them?
No.
No. And why is that? Because they've got good user experience, right?
Yep, they're easy.
They test it and they correct it, and they test it and correct it. They don't try and write the whole thing.
It wouldn't be very social if it wasn't a good user experience, right? Social media.
Yeah. So whether we like it, whether we like those platforms or not, they've nailed their user experience, right?
But like, I would like to counter to that, because like there are some things like social media, maybe you do want to optimize for people spending as much time on there as possible, but some things like compiling your program, usually you don't want compiling your program to take as long as possible, otherwise you get that other XKCD. So it seems like there should be some kind of difference there.
Sure, but you don't want your developers to spend lots of time reading about how to compile. That should be an intuitive. So actually, in terms of a seamless, productive experience for an employee, you want them to spend as little time as possible on a platform rather than as much, and that's a different angle on user experience than, say, Facebook, right?
I think it's the difference between feeling that you are assuming that all of your users are going to be superpower users, and I feel like that's sometimes the case when the further you go into back end, the more truth it becomes, especially when you get to like Linux engineers and back-end engineers. Is like, yeah, you should know how to do it. It's like
just going back to your presentation and one of the slides, I have a question that is there a Linux shell which has emojis, because that's kind of mind-blowing.
Yes.
The other reason your engineer at the beginning of the slide was having problems, well, PHP.
Were you looking at the actual screen of?
Yeah.
You know why? Because I got that from Google Images, and it was just marginally better than getting it AI generated. I think it's just like some stock image or whatever, you know.
I'm an AWS and I learned the basics. I found it very hard to the budget part, and it charged me a lot.
I'm not surprised.
But I tried to correct and sometimes so is GCP easier in
Yes.
terms of finding how much to bill? Everything was free for me, but it still keeps charging for some things that I'm not too sure.
Oh,
Where it's charging.
is it easier in terms of knowing how much it charges you?
Where is the charge coming from? I cannot locate. Like.
So, well, I mean, there are reports for billing reports in GCP. I don't know if they're better than the ones that AWS offers. I think you get $250 free credit when you first sign up, and then when it gets to zero, they don't charge you. You have to like sort of accept it or something. I mean, at least that's when I was using it. So maybe it's better. Maybe. I mean, if you use the smaller clouds, charges are more predictable. I mean, if it depends, if you're trying to learn the cloud itself, I can understand why you're using AWS, right? If you want to learn that specific cloud. If you want to do something, if you want to deploy an app or whatever, and you want to make sure that you don't go overcharge, I think the smaller clouds are better.
Thank you so much for Fernando. I think it's a really important message. I can't emphasize enough how critical I think. I'm a big advocate of user experience. I think we've got to get it right, and we're getting it wrong.
Questions were good. They were thoughtful. I think that people really thought about the topic of user experience, and they were engaged.
Can we do a mass subscribe?
Subscribe!
It's always a bit crazy here at Cloud Native Media. The tech keeps multiplying.